So I guess I'll just tell a story I've told on here many, many times because we need to start learning this story. Where does the word proletarian come from? The word proletarian originated in ancient Rome, and it means one who has children. And the reason that the word proletarian means one who has children is it referred to a class of people that had never existed before anywhere in the world. In Rome, there was a group of people who owned no property. They didn't own any land. The patricians and the plebeians owned land, but they were not slaves either. No one owned them. They were men of no property. They were proletarians. They sold their labor. They rented themselves out to someone else. They were free men, not slaves, but they had no property. They were wage laborers. The proletarian class first existed in Rome. It had never existed anywhere before in the world. And because of the existence of the proletariat, Rome had some unique problems. There were homeless people all over Rome. Even though it was the wealthiest city, it was the capital of the known world, it was the center of the Roman Empire, there were homeless children all over the streets. And some of the greatest kings and queens and generals and military leaders from the world were shocked. They said, how can this be? How can Rome be the capital of the modern world? And there are homeless people all over the streets. Well, those homeless people were proletarians. And when the proletarian cannot find work, can't pay his rent, he's out on the street. And the proletarians of ancient Rome, often they had to get together and advocate for their rights because the landowners would try to pay them as little as they possibly could and would try to demand as much work out of them as they possibly could. And so the proletarians formed guilds. And guilds were associations because these proletarians, they only did jobs that slaves could not do, right? Slaves could, pick crops, slaves could work in the mines, but proletarians were blacksmiths because not every slave was trained in how to work with metal. Proletarians were carpenters because not every slave could just work with wood. Proletarians were plumbers because Rome had a sewage system. Primitive as it was, it did have a sewage system. And so proletarians were pipe fitters and plumbers. Bricklayers were proletarians. And the various trades or jobs that the proletarians did had associations of people that would come together to demand that the employers pay them decent wages. And the proletarians, they formed their associations. And throughout Roman society, every profession had some kind of religious ritual that went with it and certain mystical beliefs. For example, the military in Rome, they had military orders, like societies within the military. And many of those military orders worshiped the god Mars, the god of war. And they had special rituals that you would learn in the military about the legend of the god Mars, about the rituals, and ceremonies around the god Mars, etc. The Navy in Rome, they worshiped the god Neptune, the god of the ocean, and they had a special temple of Neptune. And the longer that you were a sailor, the more you learned the legend and story of Neptune, the more you learned the wisdom of being a sailor, being an ocean person. And these were called the mysteries, or the mystery religions of ancient Rome. And every profession had a mystery religion. And that was how Roman society was organized. And the longer you had a particular profession, you would first be an apprentice, you'd be learning it. Eventually you'd take it on, and you would learn more and more of the profession. And as the proletarians, the wage laborers of Rome, formed their guilds to teach each other the skills of being a carpenter or being a bricklayer or being a blacksmith or being a basket weaver, the guilds began to go on strike and demand better wages. And if people weren't paying them enough, they would all refuse to work until they got for wages. And they would set a wage. They would say, we, the basket weavers, are only going to work for this amount. And they would agree on it, and then they would have solidarity. And if the employer, if the landowners, the patricians and plebeians wanted to hire a basket weaver, they had to pay him a set amount. And the Roman government did everything it could to break apart these associations of proletarians, because these associations of proletarians were cutting into their wealth, right? If the basket weavers are demanding a higher wage, if the bricklayers are demanding a higher wage, that cuts into the amount of wealth that the wealthy landowners had. And the Roman government would persecute and execute people who were involved in demanding a higher wage, and they would kill them as enemies of the state. But they continued to form these associations. They continued to stand in solidarity with each other. And as the proletarians of Rome, the bricklayers, the carpenters, the blacksmiths, the basket weavers, as the proletarians of Rome organized, they gradually all began to adopt a particular religion. Many of the Roman proletarians were Jews. In fact, almost all of the Roman proletarians were either Greeks or Jews, because that's where skilled people came from. You had Jews from Palestine, from Jerusalem, who came to Rome to earn more money. You had Greeks from Athens, from Sparta, from various cities in Greece who came, were skilled. And it was Greeks and Jews that made up the majority of the proletarians of Rome. And among the Jews, many of the Jews began to worship Jesus the carpenter, who was a Jew in Palestine who had led some kind of uprising against the Romans and had also greatly defied his own people, the comprador rulers of the Jews, the Sanhedrin and the Pharisees. And he had defied the Sanhedrin and the Pharisees, and he had also stood up and opposed the Roman Empire. And Jesus the carpenter had been given the highest form of punishment that the Roman Empire had, that was reserved only for enemies of the state. He was crucified, nailed to a cross. But the followers of Jesus the carpenter said he rose again, and that he would come back and destroy the Roman Empire. And that became the religion through which the Roman proletariat began to organize. And Christianity had an amazing power in that people were willing to lay down their lives for it. Jesus had told his followers to love your neighbor as yourself, to live for the sake of others. And Jesus had also told his followers, whoever gains his life shall lose it. But whoever loses his life for my sake shall gain it. And to be a martyr, to die for God, to die for what is right, and to die for the oppressed and the downtrodden, in Christianity was one of the sure ways that you got to go to heaven. If you gave your life for your brother, or your sister, if you sacrificed and died for the faith and for God, you were guaranteed to go to heaven. And so even though the Romans were trying to crush these guilds and these labor unions, and even though the Romans were trying to stamp out Christianity, it didn't work. Christianity proliferated throughout the Roman Empire because the Christians built organizations, solid blocks of resistance that were bonded together in a way that organizations had never been bonded together before. And as a result, Christianity flourished in ancient Rome. Year after year, Christianity continued to proliferate as a religion among the Roman proletarians. Until, after a while, the Roman elite realized that they could take aspects of Christianity and water them down. The Christians, not only did they form guilds and associations and organize strikes, but they also provided services. They built orphanages for homeless children. And so, some of the Roman elite said, if we got some of these Christians to build more of their orphanages, we could have more stability. We could get rid of this homeless children problem that we have in Rome. And the Roman elite also recognized that all throughout their empire, people would rise up against them, and they would usually rally around some kind of local god, some kind of local deity, right? The peoples of Germany would rally around Odin when they were fighting against them. The peoples of Egypt would rally around Osiris when they were fighting them. So the Romans had the idea of adopting a religion where there was only one God, and that way they could stamp out all these other religions that people rallied around to fight against the Roman Empire. And gradually, over the course of hundreds of years, Christianity in Rome divided. There was one layer of Christians who were true and loyal to the message, were willing to give their lives, and believed Jesus would return to tear down the Roman Empire. And there was another layer of Roman Christians who were watering down what the Roman Empire wanted Christianity to be. And a form of Christianity that was watered down and changed to serve the needs of the Roman Empire eventually became the state religion in Rome. This religion that they had persecuted, that they had killed people for, eventually Constantine converted to Christianity. The Emperor Constantine, it is said that he had a dream. And in the dream, he looked up at the sky and he saw a cross. And a booming voice said to him, "Under this sign you shall conquer." And because of that, he converted to Christianity. We now know, though, that Constantine's mother was a Christian already, and that she told him stories of Jesus when she was young, and that she was one of the wealthy Romans who had adopted a watered-down version of Christianity already. So Constantine's mother was a Christian. And that Constantine converted to Christianity. After him, you had Julian the Apostate, who was a non-Christian emperor. But after that, Rome became Christianized. But the Christianity of ancient Rome was not real Christianity. It was not the Christianity that had been preached by the Roman proletarians. It was not the Christianity of Jesus. It was a reinvention of Christianity to serve the needs of the Roman Empire. But it didn't work. The Roman Empire fell. And Christianizing the Roman Empire was a sad attempt to try and save the empire. If we adopt the ideology of the proletarians who are trying to overthrow us, maybe we can stabilize the empire, but it didn't work. And in fact, In fact, one of the most important texts of Christianity is called the City of God. And the City of God was written by St. Augustine. It is written from a defensive position because the greatest empire in the world, the Roman Empire, had collapsed almost as soon as it adopted Christianity. And that was not a big selling point for the Christian religion. It made Christianity look particularly weak, right? A mighty empire had converted to Christianity and it had fallen. That was not a good selling point. But the point of this story, and the reason I tell this story, and this story is put forward in the book, The Foundations of Christianity by Karl Kautsky. The reason this story is important to know is because it points out the fact that Christianity was the religious expression of the proletarian movement. When the proletariat emerged as a class in ancient Rome, the first proletarians existed. Christianity was the way that they organized themselves to fight for their rights. They cared for each other, and they fought for each other. Christianity was the religion of the Roman proletariat. And when Christianity emerged in Europe, it was a different kind of Christianity. But as capitalism became the dominant system in the world, and as feudalism emerged from capitalism, as capitalism emerged from feudalism, as the feudal order was dying, proletarians became the majority, and the proletarian movement came again. The proletarian movement reemerged, and it called itself communism or social democracy. And it was the fight of wage workers to demand their rights. Instead of calling itself a religion, it spoke in purely materialist and scientific terms, but it built labor unions, it built political parties, and it built associations. And just like the Roman elite co-opted aspects of Christianity to stabilize their empire, the imperialists, the big monopolies, the big corporations that dominated Western Europe, America, Britain, and France, they co-opted and watered down aspects of communism in order to stabilize their empire. And they created social democracy, democratic socialism, the welfare state, liberalism, the left, as a watered down version of the proletarian movement intended to stabilize their system. And they got some of the workers who were paid higher wages, and they gave them higher wages. They gave them some privilege, and they used them to control the labor movement and to control the socialist groups and to get the socialist groups to support imperialism and to support war. The aristocracy of labor. But around the world, there were people that wanted to be free from the domination of imperialism. And then World War I broke out. And World War I was the most devastating war that humanity had ever seen. Poison gas, machine guns, airplane bombers, 20 million people dying, death on a mass scale that humanity had never seen. And it never would have happened without those fake socialists, those social democrats. Those social democrats who spoke in the name of the proletarian movement. But in reality, were just agents of the imperialists. They had a watered down version of the proletarian movement to serve their respective imperialist states. They marched the workers off to war. but those in the proletarian movement who said that the hope for the world was defeating the imperialists and defeating the empire. They began calling themselves communists. And the Russian Revolution took power. And the proletarian movement of the Western countries divided between the social democrats who supported imperialism and the lower and deeper real masses who stood against imperialism and stood with the new Russian Revolution and stood with the peoples of the world. And after the Russian Revolution happened, the very first thing they did, or one of the first things they did, was call and convene the Congress of the Peoples of the East in Baku, Azerbaijan, and offer military support to the Emir of Afghanistan, and offer military support to Dr. Sun Yat-sen in China, and offer military support to anyone who would battle against imperialism. Because the proletarian movement had matured into the anti-imperialist movement. And that the interest of all humanity lay in defeating the empire. But imperialism, a system where a small group of corporations and banks dominate the world and keep the world poor, that was the main barrier to humanity being free. And so the proletarians of the Western countries that maintained their revolutionary vision and the peoples of the third world who wanted their national liberation, they formed a movement to defeat imperialism, and a movement to organize the economy rationally and raise people up out of poverty. And that movement has gone through many leaps and changes and evolutions. And that movement has called itself many different things and adhered to many different interpretations. But that is the movement that we at the Center for Political Innovation are keeping alive. The movement that started with the proletarians of ancient Rome, the movement that continued with the labor unions in Europe, the movement that opposed World War I and launched a wave of national liberation struggles against imperialism and colonialism around the world, a movement that said the working people of the Western countries should align with the people of the colonized world against the big monopolies. That is our movement. That's us. That is the Center for Political Innovation. That is our heritage as a movement. The people of the world want national liberation. Working people want their lives to get better and their living standards to go up. We want a world where human creativity and innovation is unleashed on a level never seen before. And no more do we have the irrationality of homelessness because there are too many houses, hunger because there is too much food. And that movement, the movement to unleash human creativity, the movement to raise nations up from poverty, the movement to demand justice for working families, that is our movement. That is our movement. As we oppose the march toward a new world war, as we oppose the emerging low-wage police state, as we demand a government of action to fight for working families, that is our movement. We are this movement. This is us. And if you want to be part of this movement, this beautiful movement that has existed for thousands of years, pushing forward the same values of compassion, kindness, and brotherhood, and living for the sake of others, the same values of opposing empires, the same values of sacrifice for justice and belief in humanity, The same values of building God's kingdom on earth, building a world where the creativity of all is unleashed and growth and expansion can move to even higher levels, defeating empires and oligarchies. If you want to join that movement, you should join the Center for Political Innovation. That's us. That is who we are. Because a new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.